big data companies. Another problem is that many modern data-driven companies fall outside the scope of the FCRA, which hasn't kept up with the information economy. The FCRA applies to any consumer reporting agency that furnishes a consumer report. A consumer report is a communication that addresses a person's creditworthiness, credit standing, credit capacity, character, general reputation, personal characteristics, or mode of living. A consumer report must be used to establish eligibility for credit, insurance, employment, or other uses defined by FCRA. This means that the FCRA doesn't cover all big data enterprises, just those companies engaging in furnishing consumer reports. Companies that analyze data can use it in different ways, many of which are not for the purposes listed under FCRA. Much of what people think of as big data activity, like predicting your shopping habits or major life decisions, doesn't involve consumer reports. The result is that the FCRA is not applicable to many businesses that maintain extensive dossiers about individuals. A big data company that maintains data on millions of people doesn't have as much of a market incentive to give people rights in their data or provide robust security. The law must provide that incentive. The costs of a data breach certainly help provide some incentive, but these costs are artificially low because businesses are not internalizing all the costs borne by affected individuals or by society. One of the data security failures of many big data companies is when they outright sell the data that hackers crave with virtually no accountability. For example, Brian Krebs reported how a data thief tricked an Experian subsidiary into giving him direct access to personal and financial data on more than 200 million Americans. All the thief had to do was pose as a private investigator and pay for access to consumer records using standard cash wire transfers. Once he got the data, the fraudster disseminated data containing Social Security numbers, date of birth, and other records on more than 200 million Americans. This wasn't a case involving high-tech circumvention of networks using exploits. It was just common fraud that companies have little legal incentive to avoid because selling data is so lucrative. Facilitators. Facilitators are actors that facilitate data breaches by providing handy tools that help hackers. Most facilitators don't intend to assist hackers, but they do so because they are so obsessed with their own goals that they don't pay attention to the secondary effects of their activities. In the mid-1990s, national security officials under the Clinton administration developed the Clipper chip, a special chip to be used by telecommunications companies that would provide an encryption backdoor for the government in national security situations. The backdoor would work via key escrow. Each chip would have an encryption key that the government would hold in escrow. National security officials wouldn't be able to use the key unless they made the appropriate showing of authority. The administration heavily promoted the idea of requiring the chip in devices. Companies weren't fond of the idea. Neither were consumers. Security experts raised alarm bells, pointing out some troubling vulnerabilities with the system. The Clipper chip idea soon fizzed out. After a series of coordinated terrorist attacks in Paris in 2015, national security proponents in the United States and abroad revived the attempt to push for a backdoor to encryption. British Prime Minister David Cameron declared, "The question is, are we going to allow a means of communications which it simply isn't possible to read? My answer to that question is, no, we must not." President Obama echoed these statements. If we find evidence of a terrorist plot, and despite having a phone number, despite having a social media address or email address, we can't penetrate that, that's a problem. Then FBI Director James Comey urged Congress for law enforcement to have special access to encrypted communications. Proponents for allowing government officials to have backdoors to encrypted communications should read Franz Kafka. Nearly a century ago, Kafka deftly captured the irony at the heart of their argument in his short story, The Burrow. In the story, An animal builds an elaborate burrow of underground tunnels. Riddled with fear and insecurity, the creature constructs the most elaborate burrow. A maze of passages, misdirection, defenses, and so on. He becomes obsessed with building the burrow, constantly doubting its safety, constantly regretting that he didn't build it with even more defenses. He tries to make it totally secure, but one problem remains. An enemy might invade through the entrance hole. The animal says, "At a distance of some 1,000 paces from this hole lies, covered by a movable layer of moss, the real entrance to the burrow. It is secured as safely as anything in this world can be secured. Yet someone could step on the moss or break through it, and then my burrow would lie open, and anybody who liked could make his way in and destroy everything for good." So the animal winds up sleeping outside the burrow to stand guard over the entrance. "My burrow takes up too much of my thoughts," the animal confesses. "I fled from the entrance fast enough, but soon I am back at it again. I seek out a good hiding place and keep watch on the entrance of my house, this time from outside, for whole days and nights. Call it foolish if you like. It gives me infinite pleasure and reassures me." The irony and absurdity at the heart of the story is that the animal becomes so obsessed with his project of building the most secure burrow that he sacrifices his own security in the process. Backdoors are a huge security risk, and they undermine the effectiveness of encryption for everyone. A report by a group of leading security experts concluded that installing backdoors would undermine security by creating an enormous vulnerability. If law enforcement's keys guaranteed access to everything, an attacker who gained access to these keys would enjoy the same privilege. About 60 of the leading technology companies, including Microsoft, Alphabet, Inc., Google's parent company, Apple, Facebook, and Twitter, have vigorously critiqued backdoor proposals because of the significant security risks that backdoors present. When such a chorus of technology experts and companies point out problems, it is wise to listen. The security of all our communications is of tremendous importance, and it has national security implications. If the keys got in the hands of bad guys, our financial system could be compromised. People who have access to critical systems could be blackmailed. Key research and intellectual property could fall into the wrong clutches. Private communication is not antithetical to security. It is essential to security. Encryption is a tool that can certainly be used by the bad guys, but it is also a tool that is primarily used to keep the bad guys out. Creating a major vulnerability will not make us more secure. In an incident which occurred in 2016, the FBI obtained an order from a magistrate judge to force Apple to develop software to help the FBI break into an encrypted iPhone. The case arose out of the mass shooting in San Bernardino in December 2015. 2 shooters killed 14 people and injured 22 people before eventually being killed in a shootout with the police. One of the shooters' phones was recovered, but the FBI couldn't unlock it. The deceased shooter's iPhone was secured by a feature of Apple's iOS that prevented brute force attacks on the phone. Brute force attacks use software to make repeated guesses at passwords until the password is cracked. To circumvent such attacks, Apple used a feature that delayed how frequently password guessing attempts can be made. After 10 wrong guesses, the contents of the phone would be permanently inaccessible. The FBI requested that a judge force Apple to write a new iOS to install onto the phone to get around these features. The FBI argued that a statute from 1789 gave it the authority to compel Apple to write the software. The FBI convinced a magistrate judge to issue an order to compel Apple to provide reasonable technical assistance to the FBI. Apple vigorously opposed being forced to assist. In a letter to customers, Apple wrote, "Specifically, the FBI wants us to make a new version of the iPhone operating system, circumventing several important security features, and install it on an iPhone recovered during the investigation. In the wrong hands, this software, which does not exist today, would have the potential to unlock any iPhone in someone's physical possession. The letter further stated, "The same engineers who built strong encryption into the iPhone to protect our users would, ironically, be ordered to weaken those protections and make our users less safe." The FBI eventually hired a firm to engineer a hack to break into the iPhone, and the case was dropped. But there is nothing to stop the FBI or other law enforcement agency from trying to compel companies to break their own security features. Moreover, by hiring a firm to break the iPhone's security, the government funded the development of technology to weaken security. Pouring money, time, and resources into weakening security might seem useful for an immediate case at hand, but in the long term, efforts like these undermine security. Government officials, if not checked, will open vulnerable back doors to protect the front door. These moves make us less secure, often, ironically, in the name of security. Exploiters. Exploiters are actors who learn about vulnerabilities and use them to their advantage, rather than reporting and fixing them. Exploiters are akin to those people who see something harmful but don't do anything to stop it or even warn people about it. In 2017, a strain of ransomware known as WannaCry attacked countless computers through outdated Microsoft Windows operating systems. A look into this incident reveals that there were several actors at fault, not just the hackers and the people and organizations that failed to update their operating systems. WannaCry was targeted at older versions of Microsoft Windows. As we discussed earlier, software companies have a common practice of deprecating their software. They stop supporting older versions. Many users keep using the old software because they can't afford a new version, have grown attached to their current version, have a device that can't install the necessary operating system, or have particular apps that only work on the old system. Given the severity of the attack and the number of affected computers, Microsoft rushed out a patch. Long before the attack, the National Security Agency, NSA, had discovered the vulnerability. Unfortunately, the NSA didn't inform Microsoft because it wanted to exploit the vulnerability. Had the NSA reached out to Microsoft, the problem could have been fixed. Instead of acting to keep us safe, the NSA allowed this ticking time bomb to exist because it wanted to hack into systems itself. The NSA was believed to have created a tool to exploit the vulnerability, which was exposed in a leak online and used by hackers to carry out the WannaCry attack. Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, took the unusual step of castigating government officials for exploiting the vulnerability rather than reporting it. Finally, this attack provides yet another example of why the stockpiling of vulnerabilities by governments is such a problem. This is an emerging pattern in 2017. We have seen vulnerabilities stored by the CIA show up on WikiLeaks, and now this vulnerability stolen from the NSA has affected customers around the world. Repeatedly, exploits in the hands of governments have leaked into the public domain and caused widespread damage. Miseducators. Miseducators undermine security when their actions teach people the wrong things. Miseducators help hackers by training people to engage in the behaviors that hackers can readily exploit. Training people to fall for hacker tricks. Whenever there is a big data breach caused by a person who clicked on a suspicious link in an email, security experts roll their eyes. People are just fools, they might mutter to themselves. It's so easy to blame people for doing foolish things, but security would be improved if we started blaming others, such as the organizations that teach people to do foolish things. In security, fools aren't born, they are made. A key security tip is never to click on links in emails asking users to log in. Many companies, however, send emails asking people to click on a link to log in. When companies send emails that are identical to the kind of phishing emails that hackers send, people are taught that legitimate companies send emails like this. In effect, people are being trained to fall for hacker tricks. After suffering from a data breach, the firm Evernote alerted its 50 million users with an email notifying users that it had reset their passwords. The email from Evernote told users some good security wisdom. Never click on reset password requests in emails. Instead, go directly to the service. Ironically, in the very same email, Evernote included a password reset link. The link didn't even go to Evernote's website. Instead, it went to links.evernote.mkt5371.com. The sender's email address was v-befp_eahlbofp_eahbofp_a@bounce.evernote.mkt5371.com. This email was indistinguishable from a phishing scam. Indeed, it practically screamed, "I am a phishing email." Unilateral authentication. It is commonplace for authentication to be unilateral. We must authenticate ourselves to organizations, but it's a one-way street. They don't authenticate themselves to us. Their failure to authenticate themselves to us contributes to so much fraud. We have been accustomed to readily trust company websites, phone calls, emails, texts, and other communications. They have trained us to trust them because it is cheaper and more convenient for them this way than if they had to authenticate themselves to us. But we really shouldn't trust them without authentication. For example, credit card companies often call or email people to inform them about potential fraud on their cards. At first blush, this seems good. People are being informed about fraud. The problem is that a fraudster could readily be making the call or sending the email. The fraudster could ask for people's personal information, passwords, PINs, and other sensitive information by pretending to be the card company. Organizations often expect us to just trust them whenever they call us or email us. People shouldn't be asked to give their trust so readily without a way to verify that the calls or emails are indeed coming from the companies. Companies will take steps to ensure that when consumers contact them, that consumers are who they say they are. But companies take no steps to verify that they themselves are who they say they are. When we interact with organizations, authentication should be bilateral. Companies should be developing means to authenticate themselves to us. Then we would know to expect that a company is properly authenticated, and this would teach us how to distinguish between the imposters and actual representatives from the organizations. Instead, organizations constantly call and email people and expect people to trust them. Fraudsters exploit this trust. This is how organizations train and prime people so that they will be easily subjected to fraudsters. Organizations shouldn't be contacting people and asking for any personal information unless they can convincingly verify their identity so that people can distinguish them from imposters. The credit card companies that call or email should ask people to reach back out to them on the number on their cards or go directly to their websites without clicking on links in the email. So should any company that emails people. No company should be encouraging people to click on email links. The barrage of emails and calls that people receive from organizations asking them to click this or that or to provide personal data are teaching people how to be sitting ducks for fraudsters. The cumulative effect creates a huge public harm. It weakens security for everyone. It undermines efforts to teach people good security practices, and it all but ensures that the fraudsters will find plenty of people who will fall for their schemes. Against digital technology exceptionalism. A common theme throughout our discussion of the actors who contribute to data breaches is digital technology exceptionalism, treating digital technology as different from other things. The law is so enamored or flummoxed by the Internet, algorithms, and artificial intelligence that it often treats them as completely exceptional. The world has never seen anything that reduces the barrier to surveillance and communication like the Internet. People are spied on, lied to, defrauded, manipulated, harassed, blackmailed, humiliated, and locked out. Yet the law is reluctant to hold organizations responsible. Why are platforms not held more responsible for the products and services sold on them? Why is software treated so differently from other products? One reason is that digital things seem less tangible than physical ones. If a company makes a defective ladder that breaks, there's a physicality to the product, the defect, and the injury. The digital world feels intangible, less real than the world of flesh and blood and bricks and steel. But code can kill. It can harm people in similar ways to physical items. These days, more things are dependent upon software. At Black Hat and DEF CON, two popular tech security events, researchers demonstrated how they could hack into pacemakers and insulin pumps. The researchers stated that they could reprogram a pacemaker to issue a shock or deny a shock. Andrea Matwishin has written about the inherent vulnerabilities to our health and physical safety in the Internet of Bodies. Digital pills we take will communicate through sensors to our smartphones. An artificial pancreas hardwired into the body will use software to calibrate insulin levels. The law is unprepared to deal with the individual and societal security and privacy risks of these devices. Not only have lawmakers failed to sort out the policy and legal problems of the Internet of Things generally, but they must also appropriately address what Matwishin calls the legacy code problem of software liability more generally. We must stop treating digital technologies as completely distinct from other products and services. Holding the technology industry responsible can make a big difference. Given how many devices are being hooked up to the Internet and the profound dangers that poor security can lead to, it's time we demand more from the technology industry. The software, apps, devices, and platforms they are making are no longer just the source of games and entertainment. The stakes are life and death. When it comes to digital technologies, the law often creates a buyer beware world. We must enter the world of digital technologies risking life and limb. Imagine a company that opens a lion theme park where people can play with lions. Most of the lions are gentle, but occasionally there's a ferocious one that eats people alive. There's a big sign outside the place that says, "Safety is our #1 priority." And below that, in small print, "Enter at your own risk." We assume no liability for any injuries. The law's response would normally be strict liability. The law would prevent the theme park from waiving liability and would not allow it to expose people to this kind of risk. But if the theme park were a technology company, the law would suddenly change its tune. The park now would be just a meeting place where lions interact with people, an exciting social hub for human-feline friendships. People socialize at their own risk. The park would just be bringing people and lions together. "Don't stifle innovation," defenders will cry. If you make the company responsible, then the lions will have to go. People love the lions. Only a few people get eaten, but most people experience great joy playing with the lions. It's their choice to accept the risk. Outside the digital world, the law would never tolerate forcing people to take on so much risk without the theme park being held responsible. But often, the law treats digital technology completely differently. It shouldn't. Incentives work the same for the physical world as they do for the digital world. This results in the law being much better at spurring the market to produce safe physical products and so poor at getting the market to produce safe digital ones. Legal regimes like negligence law are remarkably flexible and adaptable for even complex and opaque technologies like artificial intelligence. But judges, lawyers, and lawmakers must continually work hard to understand the foreseeable risks of these technologies and where humans are at fault in designing and using them. We are not arguing for a full, strict liability approach or for the law to make technology companies liable for all security risks. There will be always security risks with technology, and there are risks that are worth taking. The law should address unreasonable security risks, which are ones that are not justified by the benefits or that can readily be reduced through common industry standards and best practices. Far too often, there are technologies on the market that have substandard security because there is hardly any incentive to invest in better security. Because of the lack of incentives, better security is often not engineered into products, even when it would have been easy and inexpensive to do so. Companies that make these products should be held accountable. Products that fail to provide a reasonable amount of security should be penalized and restricted. It takes a village. Security professionals will tell you that there is no silver bullet on computer security, short of taking every hard drive in the world and launching them into space. It often takes a village to create a data breach. There are many actors in the system that lurk in the shadows, contributing to the problem, yet escaping much notice and not being held responsible. These actors create risks, weaken the security of others, engage in risky activities without internalizing the harm, and create vulnerable software in devices. The law's failure to hold these actors responsible and to create the right set of incentives for them with carrots and sticks overpowers nearly all the good things that various data security laws try to do. A lot of people are pointing fingers. For example, in her thoughtful analysis of several major breaches, Josephine Wolfe contends that it is unproductive to just blame the breached organization, even when that organization is partly at fault. Wolfe discusses the breach of credit card data at TJX Companies, which owns the TJ Maxx and Marshall's retail chains. Fraudsters were able to intercept and decipher wireless transmissions of data outside of store locations. She concludes, a closer look at the full timeline of the TJX breach reveals that the episode in fact involved several different technical vulnerabilities and companies. But by singling out one encryption protocol and one organization as fully responsible for the incident, the payment card industry was able to effectively shield itself from bearing any of the blame. Finger-pointing and trying to escape blame are common and predictable behaviors. This is exactly where the law must become involved. A key function of the law is to determine who should be held responsible. If responsibility is properly allocated, the responsible parties start to change. They start to internalize their costs. They start to reduce the risks. It is tempting to see bad happenings as the product of malicious rogue actors. Ascribing bad motives in this context can be counterproductive. Most actors act according to what the system incentivizes. The best way to make them act differently is to incentivize it with carrots and sticks. Data breach risks are created by a multitude of actors throughout the entire data ecosystem. The breached organizations certainly are responsible for some of the risk, but they are one piece of the pie. To be effective, the law must aim to reduce risk throughout the whole system. There are several ways data security law might better allocate risk to the right actors. Lawmakers can create rules holding specific and broad groups of actors accountable for data security risks. They can create and enforce data security rules for designers, distributors, amplifiers, facilitators, miseducators, and exploiters. Lawmakers can develop standards for liability. Judges can contribute by being more willing to acknowledge when these entities act unreasonably. Lawmakers can require all the actors to be more transparent about their operations and how they contribute to data breaches. By focusing mainly on breached organizations, the law misses how many other actors are creating big security risks. Chapter 6. Reducing Harm from Data Breaches. In 2002, an identity thief began using David Lazarus's Social Security number to open 9 different credit card accounts. The thief used the cards to rack up debts at casinos. David reached out to the police for help, but they wouldn't help him. Fortunately, David was a journalist and had the skills to track down the thief and gather evidence. The thief was arrested and convicted in 2003 and was eventually deported. David thought he had won. He was wrong. The tainted data that the thief had generated began to take on a life of its own. David tried to buy a house, but he had trouble obtaining a loan because of the debts that the thief had racked up. He was told that to clear up his record, he would have to pay $4,000 of the thief's casino debts. After a long time fighting, many phone calls, and much stress, David was finally able to get his loan approved. The nightmare was finally over. In 2007, David wrote an article about how he survived this ordeal. Years passed. A decade later, David received a phone call from a debt collector for a hospital bill in Connecticut. He had never been to a hospital in Connecticut. This error wasn't an innocent mistake, nor was it a different identity thief. It was the same thief who was at it again. And just like that, the nightmare starts again. David wrote in a follow-up article 10 years after his first article. He lamented the near impossibility of fully correcting erroneous online information, which I spent many hours trying to do the last time I dealt with this problem. David's case is not unusual. Identity theft is so prevalent because the law makes it so easy to perpetrate. Identity thieves can get away with fraud because companies are often not careful enough about authenticating people's identity. The thieves are hard to track down. Smart identity thieves know that identity theft is a great boondoggle, much better than bank robbery. Bank robbers get caught. Identity thieves don't. To make matters worse, identity theft is incredibly simple to do. Our data ecosystem makes it easy. To conduct an identity theft, a thief just needs a few pieces of personal data. The identity thief can then go on a massive spree of fraud. With how readily systems can be breached and with all the data already leaked from previous breaches, identity thieves live in a world abundant in riches. The Internet offers up a copious bazaar of personal data, some for sale and some for free. The thieves can readily obtain it and start using it. The law does little to help. Laws aimed at combating identity theft are mostly ineffective. Several laws actually make the problem worse by ratcheting up the pain and suffering for identity theft victims, as well as the overall harm and cost of data breaches. The identity theft epidemic. In the United States, more than 16 million people are victimized by identity theft in a single year. Identity theft is a Kafkaesque nightmare, plunging victims into a bureaucratic maze that can take forever to escape from. In the early 2000s, grave concerns were raised about the burgeoning scourge of identity theft. According to the FBI, in 2001, identity theft was the fastest-growing form of white-collar crime. The problem quickly became an epidemic. Today, hardly anything has improved. Types of identity theft. Identity theft is among the most tangible and legally recognized harms resulting from a compromise in the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of personal data. To understand the full impact that data breaches have on people, it helps to have a sense of the many different kinds of identity theft. Financial identity theft. Financial identity theft is the most prevalent form of identity theft. Thieves obtain credit cards or loans in the victim's name, racking up big debts. When unsuspecting victims try to obtain a loan, a job, a license, or anything requiring a credit check, the victims discover that their credit is trashed and that they owe a massive amount of debt. People can also discover that they've been victimized when they start receiving a barrage of phone calls from debt collectors. Criminal identity theft. In criminal identity theft, identity thieves provide the victims information when they are arrested. Some identity thieves dupe the police with fake driver's licenses in their victim's name. After their arrest, the thieves post bail and disappear. Later, victims discover that they are wanted for committing a crime. In some cases, the thief has amassed a long rap sheet of crimes in the victim's name. One victim was repeatedly fired from jobs and had great difficulties getting hired because his criminal records were riddled with felonies, including sex crimes involving children. In another case, a woman in the Air Force returned home from an overseas deployment to discover that she was wanted for injury to a child, assault, and other crimes. In one instance, an identity theft victim was arrested and held in prison for more than 2 weeks until the police discovered that the fingerprints on the victim's records didn't match. Even then, the nightmare didn't end. It became even more horrific when the victim was arrested again based on more tainted data from the identity thief. Medical identity theft. Another pernicious strain of identity theft is medical identity theft. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, medical identity theft occurs when someone steals your personal information, like your name, Social Security number, or Medicare number, to obtain medical care, buy drugs, or submit fake billings to Medicare in your name. In one case, a person went to donate blood but was denied. A fraudster had used her Social Security number to get treatment at an AIDS clinic. In another case, a victim was billed $44,000 for surgery that he hadn't received. One incident involved a woman who was falsely listed on the birth certificate of an identity thief's baby. The baby was born addicted to meth, and the identity theft victim was wrongly pursued by Child Protective Services for the identity thief's baby. In many cases, identity thieves use a victim's information to obtain prescriptions. The term medical identity theft originates from a report by Pam Dixon of the World Privacy Forum. She concluded her report by stating, "The victims who have been impacted by medical identity theft have to date been largely ignored, despite the serious consequences and harms they must face and deal with." Dixon wrote this report in 2006. Since then, nothing has improved. Most victims from medical identity theft suffer significant harm, and few are completely cured. Not only can medical ID theft create financial harm, but it can pollute medical records with false information that can jeopardize a patient's treatment. Sometimes, the errors can create life-threatening harm. Imagine that you have been injured, and that you are unconscious and wheeled into the emergency room. Your medical records are riddled with errors from an identity thief. Your blood type is wrong, and your allergies are incorrectly listed. There are pre-existing conditions listed that you don't have. There are treatments listed that you never received. There are drugs listed that you don't take. These errors could lead to a wrong treatment that could be lethal. Medical identity theft often takes much longer to detect than other types of fraud. The longer detection period increases the value of the data to fraudsters. Children's identity theft. Identity thieves target children because they are less likely to discover the problem. In a recent example, identity thieves pretended to be teenagers in Canada to fraudulently claim thousands of dollars in government benefits. There are more than 1 million children whose identities are stolen each year. Kids are deeply wounded from identity theft because they often don't find out that it is going on until years later. When teenagers or young adults start to pay taxes, take out college loans, or get credit cards, they might discover that a thief has been conducting fraud in their name for years. Their credit will be ruined. They might owe tens of thousands of dollars, and they will have great difficulty in obtaining a loan or a credit card. If children are victims of medical identity theft, the fraud can result in astronomical health insurance premiums when they obtain their own coverage. Harms of identity theft. Identity theft is often brushed aside by police departments as a minor crime, but identity theft can be far more harmful than physical theft. Identity theft also has reverberations that can last for years. Cost, stress, anxiety, and lost time. Victims of identity theft suffer significant cost, stress, anxiety, and lost time to repair the damage. Some must sell possessions or borrow money to pay the expenses. Many must take time off from work or sacrifice their vacation time to clean up the mess. Victims' credit scores plummet, and they lose time trying to clean up the pollution to their credit history. Some victims have their credit cards canceled. Others see their interest rates skyrocket. Victims are often barraged with calls from collection agencies. Some victims are unable to rent an apartment or find housing, while others have trouble finding a job. Medical identity theft victims can be denied health insurance coverage because thieves have used up their benefits. Some victims lose their health insurance entirely. Cleansing one's records by clearing up the muck of bad data can be quite difficult. For example, HIPAA, the law that regulates health data, provides for a right to amend rather than correct one's records. Patients can have notations about wrong information added to their records, but healthcare providers often don't delete incorrect data. The muck remains in the records. Identity theft is like contracting a chronic disease that just won't go away. Victims will often have to play an endless game of whack-a-mole, trying to shut down the fake accounts as quickly as they pop up. Around 50 to 60% of people surveyed in recent years indicated that their identity theft issue remained unresolved, and the statistics are getting worse. In 2013, 51.1% reported that the identity theft remained unresolved. In 2016, the percentage had risen to 61.9%. In 2013, 27.5% resolved the issue in under 6 months. Only 16.8% resolved the issue in under 6 months in 2016. More than 75% of victims reported being severely distressed about the identity theft. People felt angry, fearful, powerless, betrayed, embarrassed, and frustrated. Many felt anxiety. Many felt vulnerable and violated. Costs to organizations and to consumers. Not only are breaches harmful to people, but they are also very costly and harmful to organizations. At first blush, some might think, serves these organizations right. They don't protect our data enough, and now they have to pay for it. Good. They ought to pay. It certainly is fair for organizations to be held accountable when they have a breach because they did something wrong or could have done something better. When organizations are at fault, they ought to feel some pain from a breach. But the costs are often too much. Don't compensate people who are harmed, don't serve to deter bad conduct, and end up hurting everyone. Organizations that suffer data breaches aren't just large, profit-hungry corporations. They are schools, colleges, hospitals, charities, and small businesses. The money schools spend on breaches is money lost from education. Money spent on hospital breaches takes away from expenditures on health care. In many cases, the costs are passed along to consumers in terms of higher prices. The organizations are thus not footing much of the bill. Instead, individuals are doing so, including the very people who are identity theft victims. Moreover, these costs go primarily towards cleaning up after a breach. Only a portion of the expenditure goes to improving security. Fines by federal agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, and state attorneys general mostly go into the coffers of the U.S. Treasury to be spent on whatever whims the government desires. Data breach victims rarely see much money or other meaningful redress from class action litigation. Instead, victims just receive endless offers of free credit monitoring that don't do much to protect them. How the law fails to prevent identity theft. The law attempts to stop identity theft by trying to deter it with punishments after it occurs. That strategy is not working. The law's main tool for combating identity theft has been to criminalize it. In 1998, the federal government enacted the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act. The law makes it a federal crime to knowingly transfer or use, without lawful authority, a means of identification of another person with the intent to commit or to aid or abet any unlawful activity that constitutes a violation of federal law, or that constitutes a felony under any applicable state or local law. Following the federal law, most states passed their own laws criminalizing identity theft. Before 1998, only 3 states had such laws. By 2002, The number had grown to 44 states. Today, all 50 states have criminalized identity theft. These laws are more an exercise in optics than a meaningful way to combat identity theft. Criminal law already had many tools to address identity theft prior to these laws because identity theft falls under criminal fraud laws. In other words, identity theft was a crime long before the states created special new laws to criminalize it. The problem with using criminal law to combat identity theft is that it is too little, too late. Identity thieves are not deterred by criminal laws because they can so readily avoid detection. Identity thieves could be anywhere, in a different city, a different state, or even a different country. The thieves are very hard to track down. Suppose you live in a city and are victimized by identity theft. You complain to the local police department. Unfortunately, the police lack the time and resources to start hunting around the world to locate the thief. They have murders, robberies, and violent crimes to solve. Identity theft isn't a priority. Suppose you are lucky and the police devote the time to do a thorough investigation. They track down the thief's location to a small town in another state. The police aren't going to travel to this town to find the thief. At best, they will call the police in the thief's town for help. But those police officers have their own criminal cases to investigate. Their first priority is to help people in their own town, not someone who lives in a city far away. But let us suppose that the police in the town decide to invest their time and resources to help. By the time of the investigation, which often is a long time after the fraud occurred, the thief is likely long gone. Many identity thieves are not even in a different town or state. They might be in other countries, which makes them even more difficult to track down. The result is that hardly any identity thieves are convicted. In one estimate, only about 1% of instances of identity theft result in a conviction. Identity thieves know that they will rarely ever get caught. The chorus of laws criminalizing identity theft may sound quite harmonious, but they are little more than useless background music that has barely any effect on reducing the amount of identity theft. How the law facilitates identity theft. The law is more than merely ineffective at preventing identity theft. The problem with the law is far worse. In fact, it's quite outrageous. The law actually facilitates identity theft. The worst password ever created. Every year, Splash Data compiles a list of the most commonly used bad passwords based on leaked passwords. Year after year, the same bad passwords dominate the list. A few shuffle up or down, but there isn't much change. Here are the most common worst 10 for 2018. 1. 123456. 2. Password. 3. 123456789. 4. 123456778. 5. 12345. 6. 11111. 7. 1234567. 8. Sunshine. 9. QWERTY. 10. I love you. Other popular candidates include Princess, Monkey, Password 1, Welcome, and Football. These passwords are bad, really bad, but none are the worst password ever created. So, what is the worst password in all of human history? The Social Security number, SSN, is the worst password ever created, and it is a creation of the law. The federal government created the SSN in 1936 as part of the Social Security system. The SSN wasn't designed to be a password. It was created to be used in conjunction with a person's name, to make sure that information about people with the same name wouldn't get mixed up. Over time, unfortunately, businesses and government agencies began to use the SSN to authenticate identity. Countless companies and organizations still use people's SSNs to verify that people are really who they say they are. If you know your SSN, the assumption goes, then you must be you. The irony is that the SSN was designed to be part of a username, and now it's being used as a password. Congress has sat idly by as the SSN has been misused. In 1974, when Congress passed the Privacy Act, there was a provision in the bill that would have restricted organizations from misusing SSNs. But this provision was dropped before the Privacy Act was passed. As a password, the SSN is just a 9-digit number, no better than the 6th most popular password, 123456789. Here it is as an SSN, 123-45-6789. A random string of numbers is probably not enough entropy, lack of order or predictability, to prevent the password from being guessed or otherwise cracked. Professor Alessandro Acquisti and Ralph Gross found that some SSNs could be guessed through reverse engineering using public data and information from social media sites. Armed with your SSN, identity thieves can gain access to various accounts, open new accounts in your name, and engage in fraudulent transactions and attribute them to you. All this is possible because they have, in essence, obtained your password, the SSN. But what makes an SSN a worse password than, say, the password 123? Why is the SSN the worst password ever? There are two reasons. First, the SSN is something that identity thieves know is used as a password, and they can readily find a person's SSN. SSNs are often in various public documents and countless record systems. Scores of data breaches have resulted in compromised SSNs, which are peddled in underground online markets on the dark web. SSNs are also sold legally by many companies. That's right. It's totally legal for companies to sell people's SSNs. At least with the password 123, others don't know that it is your password, and it's more difficult to find out. Second, SSNs are quite hard to change. The beauty of passwords that you create is that if they are compromised, you can quickly change them with very little effort. Not so with SSNs, which are a tremendous hassle to change. Whenever there is a data breach involving your SSN, you now have a potentially lifelong increased risk of identity theft because SSNs are so difficult to change. Why people can't really protect themselves. Over and over again, we hear the typical spiel about how people should take advantage of credit monitoring, be alert, shred their documents, guard their SSNs, and so on. A list of these tips are at the end of countless news articles about data breaches. Reporters include these tips to give people hope and some sense of power that they can do something to protect themselves. Unfortunately, these tips provide false hope and an illusory sense of control. The most important thing people can do to protect themselves is to get angry at their lawmakers for not passing the adequate laws. Without legal change, data security isn't likely to improve. When many people hear about individuals being victimized by identity theft, they might think, the victims must have done something wrong. I'm safe because I'm careful with my data. Some people take obsessive precautions to protect themselves, such as refusing to provide their SSN to organizations that request them on various forms or applications. But that is a losing battle. The law often requires organizations to collect SSNs. For example, your employer must collect your SSN. If you are hired as an independent contractor, tax law requires that you provide a W-9 form with your Social Security number on it. You will need to provide your SSN to open financial accounts or obtain loans or credit. Suppose that somehow you manage to avoid giving out your SSN. You eschew employment, bank accounts, credit cards, phone service, and more. You move to a remote cabin in the woods without internet or electricity. Are you safe? Nope. Your SSN is still out there and still widely used and available. There's often nothing you can do to remove it from public records or to stop it from being sold. The inadequacy of credit monitoring. When an organization has a data breach, it will often offer a year or two of credit monitoring to any victim who wants it. Providing free credit monitoring has become the norm. Even in breaches where credit monitoring won't be helpful or relevant, organizations offer it almost reflexively because everyone has come to expect it. Given how often credit monitoring is offered after data breaches, one would think that it is a great cure for any harms or a vaccine against future harms. But credit monitoring isn't a cure or vaccine. It's just a limited diagnostic tool. Credit monitoring just tells you if something odd is going on in your credit reports. Consumer reporting agencies make huge profits by selling credit monitoring. They entice people to shell out monthly subscription fees. In essence, these companies are asking you to pay money to monitor the data they have already collected about you, without your consent, and for their own profit. The epitome of chutzpah. Think of it this way. Imagine I decide to keep dangerous tigers in my backyard, right next to your house. I have a rather flimsy fence. I offer to install a sensor that will alert you if my tigers might enter your backyard, but only if you pay me a monthly fee. Should you really be paying money for this? Shouldn't this be my responsibility? For example, Equifax sells a service it calls Equifax ID Patrol. Help better protect your identity and monitor the credit you've worked hard to earn. 3-bureau credit file monitoring. Lock and unlock your Equifax credit report. Customize alerts to stay informed about unusual activities. There's a monthly fee of $16.95. But many of the offered services are free because the law requires them to be, such as the ability to lock and unlock credit reports. The law entitles people to a free copy of their credit report each year from all 3 consumer reporting agencies. Jittery consumers purchase these services, thinking that they will be safe. But these services don't make people safe. They are not cures, and they will not stop identity theft. If these services really do help prevent fraud in people's records, then they should be free. The Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA, requires that consumer reporting agencies use reasonable procedures to ensure maximum possible accuracy. If credit monitoring helps ensure that one's credit report is accurate and not polluted with fraudulent information, then it should be required under the law's mandate. Credit monitoring hikes up the cost of data breaches. Organizations that have a breach must buy it for people. Credit monitoring is a great revenue source for consumer reporting agencies, but it is an added expense for organizations having a breach that is often passed to consumers in the form of higher prices. Data breaches would be cheaper if everyone already had free credit monitoring. Sadly, however, this is not how courts or regulators have interpreted the FCRA. Irresponsible issuers of credit. Back in 1981, in the famous case involving an accident resulting from a defect in a Ford Pinto, it came to light that Ford knew about the design defect in the car but ignored it because it calculated that paying damages in lawsuits would cost less than fixing the design flaw. Professor Chris Hufnagel illustrates that the same phenomenon is happening with identity theft. Companies grant credit carelessly because it is cheap to do so. Much of the losses are sloughed off on victims because the companies aren't forced to internalize them. Identity theft often happens because companies let it happen. It is an economic decision. Companies want to make it quick and easy for people to obtain credit. For example, you might be standing in the checkout line of a store with some expensive merchandise. The checkout clerk says, "Do you want to apply for our store credit card and receive 10% off?" You're in a hurry. "How long will this take?" you ask. "I don't have a lot of time." "It's super fast and easy," the clerk says. "Just fill out this short application and we can have your account created in less than a minute, and you'll get 10% off." Because the application process is so quick, you say, "Sure." But what if the application process took a lot longer? You might not have time to wait around. You might not want to fill out a long form and answer many questions. This is a calculated business risk decision by companies. They know that their quick and easy process can be exploited by fraudsters. Fraud will cost them, but they will reap far more rewards by getting more people to sign up for the card. But there's a cost that credit issuers aren't taking into account, the cost to victims of identity theft. The victims are often not their customers. These victims are the people whose identities are stolen to create fake accounts. Hoofnagel provides data from the credit applications of 6 identity theft victims to show how obvious incorrect data often isn't flagged. Applications had the wrong address, wrong phone number, or wrong date of birth. Some contained multiple mistakes. One even had the victim's name misspelled. These red flags in the credit applications could readily have been identified and investigated to discover the fraud, but they were ignored. Identity theft is a product of deliberate carelessness. The reason so much identity theft occurs is because it is cheaper to expose people to the risk of identity theft than to exercise more care in vetting credit applications. Courts and legislatures are also to blame because they fail to adequately recognize the harm of identity theft or data breaches, and will not make companies internalize the full costs. The companies do their cost-benefit analysis and conclude that they can expose people to the risk of identity theft because many costs are external. In one of the most egregious cases, Huggins versus Citibank, several banks negligently issued credit cards in Kenneth Huggins' name to an identity thief without investigating the accuracy of the credit card application. The thief racked up hefty charges, which were falsely attributed to Huggins. Huggins was hounded by collection agencies and spent much time trying to repair the damage. He was only partially able to clean up the mess. Huggins sued the banks. The banks didn't argue that they acted carefully and properly. Instead, they claimed the case should be dismissed because Huggins wasn't their customer. The court began by noting that it was greatly concerned about the rampant growth of identity theft and financial fraud in this country. The court further noted that we are certain that some identity theft could be prevented if credit card issuers carefully scrutinized credit card applications. However, the court then concluded that it would decline to recognize a legal duty of care between credit card issuers and those individuals whose identities may be stolen. The relationship, if any, between credit card issuers and potential victims of identity theft is far too attenuated to rise to the level of a duty between them. Even though it is foreseeable that injury may arise by the negligent issuance of a credit card, foreseeability alone does not give rise to a duty. In sum, the court concluded that there is no duty on the part of credit card issuers to protect potential victims of identity. To translate the legalese, this case means that companies can make a ton of money by being very careless in issuing credit cards, and they don't have to do anything to protect people who might be harmed by their carelessness. If courts and legislatures were to better recognize harm and force companies to internalize it, then we would see an end to the sloppy practices that allow so much identity theft to occur. Until that time, companies can be just like Ford with the Pinto. Other courts have taken differing views, but as a general matter, far too often courts aren't holding companies responsible. Because of this, identity thieves can readily open fraudulent accounts in people's names by supplying just a few pieces of information, which they can readily obtain from a data breach. Taking the sting out of data breaches. Data breaches cause far too much needless harm. The law can lessen or stop much of this harm. As we discussed earlier, we can't stop all data breaches. Not only is this an unrealistic goal, but it is undesirable. The obsession with stopping all breaches has worsened the problem. We can reduce the number of breaches, but we are going to have to live with some of them. There's another way to help the problem, though. We can take much of the sting out of data breaches. They need not be so harmful to individuals or so costly to organizations. If SSNs weren't used as passwords, for example, then the SSN would just be a number and nothing more. A data breach of SSNs wouldn't cause harm. The law should ban the use of SSNs to authenticate identity. Congress could pass such a law, but it hasn't done so, despite one of us proposing the idea at a congressional hearing back in 2005. However, no new law needs to be passed for a change to occur. The law currently has ample tools to stop the use of SSNs as passwords. The FTC could use its enforcement power under several laws to halt the misuse of SSNs for authentication purposes. The general standard for data security for FTC enforcement is reasonable security. This standard is used in the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, of 1999, a law that regulates financial institutions. The FTC's broadest authority to enforce for reasonable data security is under Section 5 of the FTC Act. For the past 25 years, the FTC has enforced against unreasonable data security as a violation of the FTC Act's prohibition of unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. The misuse of SSNs as passwords is unreasonable. No security expert would argue that using SSNs to authenticate identity is a reasonable security practice, given the more effective and less dangerous alternatives for authenticating identity. The SSN should never be used as a password to authenticate identity. Through a few enforcement actions, the FTC could fault companies that use SSNs as passwords. Other companies would then quickly take note and change their practices to avoid getting in trouble. If the FTC were to take this step, one of the best tools for identity thieves would be neutralized. Without this easy tool, many of the less sophisticated thieves would be out of luck. Of course, the more sophisticated thieves would undoubtedly try something else. But most identity thieves aren't very sophisticated. They do the crime because it is so easy. The result, we predict, would be a significant reduction in identity theft. Countless people wouldn't be victimized and put through a harrowing, time-consuming, and costly ordeal. Data breaches would be less costly to organizations because compromised SSNs wouldn't be able to cause so much harm. Unfortunately, we still await a federal law or FTC enforcement or rule to neutralize SSNs. The government has assigned to all of us the worst password ever created, and we can't change it. Nearly a century after the creation of the SSN, the government still won't protect us by limiting its use. The law should also hold responsible the actors that make data breaches so harmful. Too many companies are loose about granting credit or have poor ways of authenticating identity. The law fails to force them to fully internalize the cost of their practices to individuals. As a result, fraudsters continue to take advantage of the system. The loss is borne by the individuals and the companies having the breach.